Let me welcome you. I'm Alan Borsick. I'm a senior fellow, which I think we can all agree on that, here at Marquette Law School, part of the Lubar Center for Public Policy and part of the public policy program more broadly here. And as you know, joining me up here is Brittany Kinser, one of the two candidates for Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction in the election that's, it's a long time from now. Oh. Wait, it's rushing at us. April 1st, 11 days from now, I believe I'd count that. If I may say so before we get started, our intention and hope had been to have a candidate debate and to have both candidates take part. I'm not here to be judgmental, but just to state the facts that we invited all three candidates prior to the primary to take part in a debate, whichever two of them made it through that round, about this point ahead of the final election. And all three campaigns agreed conceptually at that point. However, that didn't hold after the election, after the primary election. And so we were eager to have the incumbent, Dr. Jill Underly, join us here. She declined, and we couldn't work out a date. We actually offered her a one-on-one session, and that didn't occur either. So we are not here to take sides in this election, but we are here to talk with the candidate who agreed to show up. In the Lubar Center, and the director of the Lubar Center, Judge Derek Mosley, is here. When Judge Mosley came on board, like 3 years ago now, time flies, right? He created a set of programs that we call Get to Know, and it's a little less formal and a little more conversational than some of our classic On the Issues programs. And this is labeled a Get to Know program with Brittany Kinser, which is exactly what I want to do, is to talk about who you are, how you got here, and also then some of the issues that are in this campaign. And I will follow my role model here from Derek and start with the question of tell us about how you got to Milwaukee, how you got to this position, where you grew up, that kind of stuff. Okay,
where I grew up and all of that. Okay, so I have been living in the Milwaukee area for now 12 years, almost to the day. So I moved here 12 years ago. I grew up in a very far northwest suburb of Chicago called Crystal Lake, Illinois, about a half an hour south of Lake Geneva. We used to spend some of our holidays there and time there. So I grew up in Illinois. I went to school to be a special ed teacher. I'm the I guess, what do you want to know? Like, I guess I'm the oldest of four. So I'm the oldest of four. My parents are divorced. So I thought I'd
don't have to
put
get too
that one. Okay. Just making me more, like as a person.
How did you end up being a special ed teacher? What led you to that?
So what led me to being a special ed teacher was in 8th grade. I went to visit a school. It was a school trip. A class trip. And one of my classmates, his brother, went to a school that specialized in students with significant delays. And it was a school for special needs students with significant delays. And it was really wonderful. It was a place that helped high school students be prepared for the real world. And that's where I thought, I want to be a special ed teacher, how everyone worked together, the parents were involved, kids were successful after leaving the school. And that's really when I was 14 years old, that's when I decided I wanted to be a special ed teacher. And then I stuck with that. There was a point where I was also a high school athlete and a college athlete, and I torn my ACLs, and I thought, well, maybe I want to be a physical therapist after spending so much time with them. But I stuck with special ed, and I was a special ed teacher for 10 years in Chicago public schools. And then I worked at the district level when Arnie Duncan was superintendent. And then I went, and during that time I was getting my master's in designing science curriculum for the Illinois Institute of Technology. And they were partnering with 2 middle school Chicago public school teachers who had started a charter school. And they were going to start this 6 through 12 school that was focused on STEM, on math and science and technology. They asked me if I would be a part of that. And so that was my first experience with charter schools, and I didn't know much about them. And so I went to visit their flagship school. It was great. Kids were coming up and introducing themselves. Staff were really mission driven, and it was a really great experience. So I did do that. I went and opened up a science 6 through 12 school, charter school. That was my first experience. Fortunately, as we were doing the science labs, kids weren't able to read at grade level. And it's really hard to do a science lab. Well, you can do the lab, but being able to read and write and do the summary part when you're at a 1st and 2nd grade reading level is almost impossible. And so I realized I wanted to go back down into the elementary grades and help there, because I thought if we can make sure our kids can learn how to read, they'll have a brighter future. I ended up getting into a program at Columbia, New York, and that's where I got my license to be a principal. And that's where I found out about Rocket Ship. And Rocket Ship was doing really great work with families. Students were, much higher levels. They're growing. I went to visit. Ended up getting a job there in California. Ended up moving there to work at their schools. And then Milwaukee came to Rocket Ship in California and asked for Rocket Ship to open up schools outside of California. And since I was a Midwesterner out there, they thought, oh, Milwaukee, Chicago, same thing. I'm like, it's not really, but I was a Midwesterner. And so I opened up Rocket Ship's first school outside of California here in Milwaukee. We had the largest opening with 300 students. I was able to meet so many families. I knocked on so many doors, a 2-mile radius of the South Side School. After 2 years, we won an award from then Superintendent Evers for beating the odds, for helping students grow and learn how to read. So,
Rocket Ship had, and I think
take this
still,
off, I'm warm.
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, except you got to keep the mic.
Yeah, okay.
Rocket Ship had an interesting program. Was quite tech-based, computer-based. Tell me about Rocket Ship and what you learned in your time there.
Yeah, and I think that was what people thought. It was tech-based. There was a portion of the day, depending on how old you were, you had some time on individualized learning plans that were online. But during that time, we were also pulling students and tutoring them if they were behind in reading. So Rocket Ship has their mission when I was there is to close the achievement gap within our lifetime. And sadly, Milwaukee has the largest achievement gap in the country between Black and white students. And so that was our mission. And then the 3 pillars is as individualized, personalized learning for students, talent development, making sure that school leaders and teachers are getting the support they need, and coaching, and then also parent power, so making sure we're partnering with parents in the school.
And how successful has Rocket Ship been in Milwaukee?
So we have 2 schools, and I think that we have been successful with some things. We've had ups and downs, just to be honest, right? And so I haven't been at Rocket Ship now, it's in my 3rd year. And so I know one of the schools, the report card, 4 stars, and the other one is still working on doing more for the community, yeah.
What have you learned in those, both as a special ed teacher and in your charter experiences, about what would work in closing the gaps and why they've been so hard to close?
Yeah. So when we opened up Rocket Ship Southside Community Prep, we were really focused on phonics. And we had bought the balanced literacy curriculum, and the coach that had the literacy coach, Dr. Sarah Scott, had worked with the woman who had come up with the whole balanced literacy. She said, this doesn't work, put that in the closet and lock it up. And we had just bought this curriculum. I thought, oh gosh, okay. So we did do it, and we made sure we helped our teachers learn how to teach phonics, and phonemic awareness. We used a research and evidence-based curriculum at the time, and you could see students were growing. That's how we won that award. But then we went back to using balanced literacy as a network, and you could see the results were not where they needed to be. And so they're now back to using phonics approach the last 2-3 years. And so thankfully. So I really believe in early literacy being key to making sure that our children can read, making sure that our teachers are getting the training they need to in teacher colleges. I went to a teacher college, and I realized as I came out to teach, this was 25 years ago, I wasn't taught how to teach reading. And I have students in front of me. I'm a special ed teacher. I was a special ed teacher my first couple of years in a high school, and I realized I don't know how to teach these students who don't know how to read. So I had to take more classes and training. So we need to make sure that we are making sure our teachers are prepared, and then ensuring that we're using the research and evidence-based curriculum, they're getting the support, we're being transparent about how students are doing, and making sure parents are a part of the process too.
Your emphasis on reading, which also applies to organization you've been launching prior to getting into this campaign. Are things getting better?
So 95 Wisconsin, so I can talk a little bit about that. So that's how I got into this. So 95 Wisconsin is an initiative where we provide one-on-one tutoring to students who have fallen behind after 3rd grade. Actually, we're doing it in 2nd grade too. And so it's 90 minutes a week. It is with a certified teacher. Stanford did some research on the program we were doing because it was working. It's a program from Oakland. And it's getting awards for working, and it is working. We can see students with the one-on-one tutoring, students are growing at least 2 years, which is really exciting for students who haven't grown. And then the other part is making sure that schools are using phonics, a research and evidence-based phonics curriculum. And we are going in and I'm helping school leaders support their teachers in using that phonics curriculum. And so the schools that are using it to fidelity, making sure that they're actually teaching those parts and the pacing, we can see the growth. We're looking at the growth for the schools. So it is working. So
to continue with that subject, Wisconsin Act 20, as it's called, the reading law that passed 2 years ago, you would consider yourself a supporter of that?
Yes, I'm a supporter of that. I think it's really key I think it's a good first step in making sure that we're focused on early literacy, but now it's making sure that the schools have the support to ensure that the teachers have the instructional knowledge to teach phonics. They have the research and evidence-based curriculum. The students are getting the Ames-Webb's testing, that we're being transparent about it. So the students are getting tested in kindergarten through 3rd grade, and we need to make sure that the families, though, are also aware of how kids are doing. So I think the transparency around it and accountability is something that needs to make sure that we're doing. So.
I understand you're a candidate for state superintendent. Why?
Didn't you ask me that before?
Why did you decide to run? And frankly, it wasn't a secret. You first announced you weren't going to run.
Yeah.
Then changed your mind at the last minute.
It wasn't. It was supposed to be a secret, but then people started talking about it. This time last year, I was starting to build 95 Wisconsin, and so 95 Wisconsin is a new initiative, and I did not think that I'd be running for state superintendent. That was not in the plan. That was not part of my 5-year plan. But I was talking to DPI about 95 Wisconsin. We were talking about the fact that only 3 out of 10 children are reading well enough to go to college and have a career. This is based off of NAEP, the Nation's Report Card. And in Milwaukee, it's even worse. We have the worst results in the nation for our Black children. Only 5% of our Black children are reading well enough to go to college or have a career. And we were discussing this, and they wanted to know more about the program. So I'm working in 5 schools here in Milwaukee. How could we spread this program throughout Wisconsin? And I appreciated those conversations. This is to help children make sure that they can read. Reading, when we talk about all these other distractions in this campaign, the true enemy is illiteracy. Our children not being able to read, that is the enemy. And so we were having conversations, and then in August, I found out that Jill Underly lowered the bar for what it means to be proficient in reading. And I was shocked because results have been going down year over year, but that doesn't mean that we just change the scores to make it look better. We've got to really have a plan, support our schools, our teachers, and our kids. We don't want to make it look like they are doing better than they are. It also would mean that some students won't qualify for tutoring or won't qualify for programs if we're saying that they are proficient. So I reached out right away when I found out, and I texted someone there at the top, and I said, is this really true? Did you all do this? Like, we've been in conversations. This was never part of the conversation. And then I was told that 80 experts got together to change these standards in the spring. And then I find out that they signed a non-disclosure, so we won't know what happened. And then I said, but why would you do that? And he said, well, we weren't even aligned to the nation's report card. I said, yes, we were. So I sent him the links. I said, fourth grade was a little lower. We should have actually raised the standard. And then I was told that I was too angry. And that didn't make me very happy. He was right, I was angry. And then that made me angrier. So I just said, you know, if more people knew that only 3 out of 10 children are reading well enough, more people would be angry. And if they find out that you lowered the standards that Governor Evers set, they're going to be angry. And so I put my phone down because he was right. I was angry. I should stop texting. And so I went for a run. And there's this area, I live in Wauwatosa, the forest exploration area, if anyone's been in the county ground area over there, and went for a run, and that's kind of like where I say my prayers and like just, you know, kind of calm down, why would you do this? And it popped into my head to run for state superintendent. And it didn't go away, it was pretty loud. And so I then started to ask people, what do you think about me running for state superintendent? I've never run for a campaign. The most I've ever done is maybe knock on some doors for people. But I didn't know who to reach out for a campaign manager. I didn't know, I didn't know all that it entailed to run. So I couldn't figure out who would be my campaign manager. It's gonna cost millions of dollars to run. So then in December, and I knew I needed 2,000 to 4,000 signatures in December. That's a lot of signatures over the holidays, right? And it's cold in Wisconsin. I've knocked on lots of doors to recruit students, but not in December. And so December 1st, I just thought, okay, I can't find a team. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to continue on with 95 Wisconsin. It's a great initiative. But then someone in this room, it's not you, messaged me, and he said something to the fact of like, I heard you're not going to run. And what I took from it was like, who's going to be the voice for our children? And I was like, oh gosh, you know. But then he did something else, is he connected me with someone who said that he could help me. He called me and said, hi, my name's Rob. You don't know me. But I have 50 volunteers who are ready to go get you signatures. We need you to run for state superintendent. And my sister was with me, my little youngest sister from down in Chicago. She was here. She's never here really. I'm usually going to Chicago to see my family. And she said, you know, you should do this. And our dad passed away about 6 years ago. And she said, Dad would want you to do it too. And so with the help of Rob, and he's like, I'll even be your campaign manager until you find someone. I'm like, have you ever been a campaign manager? He's like, no. He's like, but we can figure it out. And so on Sunday night, I think it was December 15th, one of my former kindergarten teachers, who's an expert phonics teacher, said she'd be the brave soul to be the one person to sign up with me so that we could start collecting signatures. And so we did it on a Sunday night, and right away the news found out. I had no idea what I was stepping into. So,
all those people.
Yeah, all those people.
What have you learned about campaigning? Or to put it a second, what have you learned about yourself while campaigning? I mean, it is a new experience for you.
Yeah, it's a new experience. So let's start off the positives. The positives is that it's been something that we have in common, all of us throughout the state. Whether we go far north or we're down here in Milwaukee or Kenosha, everyone is concerned about their children's future. Whether they have their own child, they have a grandchild, niece, nephew, neighbor that they take care of, they're concerned because they're seeing that children aren't learning how to read. And so everyone I've talked to, no one has told me, oh, no, I don't want kids to read. That's a bad problem. No, that's not it. And so we have more in common. And we they want to divide. I feel like we want to divide America on politics. But you know what everyone agrees on? Everyone needs to learn how to read. Everyone. And so I even talked to my bank teller now it's been like a month and a half ago. She's like, are you running for office? I said, yes. And I said, did you know that only 3 out of 10 children are reading well enough to go to college? And I talked about the Milwaukee statistics, and she said, oh, Brittany, you do not have to tell me this. I have been a bank teller now at Chase for 25 years, and every year it's been getting worse. She has to read people their bank statements now. She has to show them where to sign. And this isn't just every once in a while. This is happening a lot, she said. So that's what I've learned, that we have something in common. And I think the part that I've been really, it's been upsetting, is that I was told that there would be lies told about me and things that weren't true. And I didn't really believe that. I was like, no, I'm running for state superintendent, and I was naive. And so I know you warned me, and Deb is
Excuse me while I point to Deb Kerr over there, who was the candidate 4 years ago.
I didn't want to believe it.
Nodding her head.
I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to believe that people wouldn't do that, but it actually is. And at first it really upset my friends and family, people who know me. Those were the first people that reached out, wanting to fight back, and they were upset. But then I think like yesterday something came out where it's just completely false, and it makes me really upset, because it's that bad. And so I feel like we have to have laws so that doesn't happen. And right now there are no laws. You can come out and say really inflammatory things about people and things that are not true, and you're not protected as someone who's running for office. And we want more people to run for office. And it also is so expensive to run for office. If I didn't have people who were willing to, donate, it would be very difficult. So I think those are the things I'd love to see changed, that you can't just say things that are false about people without some kind of consequence, right? Like, you shouldn't be able to do that.
It's hard to say this with a straight face, but this is a nonpartisan race, which of course it's not. Mm-hmm. The Democratic Party officially is supporting Dr. Underly, did 4 years ago, to the tune of millions of dollars at that time. And your support is coming primarily from the right side of the spectrum and from Republicans. Mm-hmm. To what degree is this a partisan issue?
So,
and how would you describe yourself in partisan terms?
So I am really proud of the fact that not only did Governor Tommy Thompson endorse me on the same day that Democrats for Education Reform endorsed me, and then Dr. Fuller the next day. And there's been others who are reaching out. And I love the fact that we, like I said, people want kids to be able to learn. We know that there is an issue in our whole, it's not just Wisconsin, it's not just a Wisconsin issue. NPR just did a whole thing on, we have a reading crisis in our country. It has become somewhat partisan, but I'm proud that I've had people on both sides who are supporting me and know my work. I'm an education issue person. I'm a moderate. I've said I'm a Blue Dog Dem, because I was trying to figure out how do I describe myself. I'm someone who works with people across the aisle, because that's what you have to do to work for kids. If you're only going to work with, the Democrats or the Republicans, you're not going to get anything done. We live in a state where the legislature, the majority is Republican, but then we have a Democratic governor. And so you have to be able to work across the aisles. And I'm proud of the fact that, I've been called a voucher lobbyist. I've never worked.
Many times.
I know, lately. Yes, I know. And I said, last night I clarified that I've only worked in public schools. I worked in Chicago public schools. I worked for a nonprofit public charter school, and then I worked for a nonprofit here in Milwaukee, and now I run my own initiative. So I've never been paid by a private school to work for them or lobby for them. I am for school choice. I'm supportive of school choice. And so I think that, I addressed that last night, that again is an inaccuracy.
There was a session last night, just to clarify, sponsored by the Wisconsin Public Education Network and several other organizations, online. It was not face-to-face. Mm-hmm. But it was the only time during this campaign so far. Is there any change?
No, I have another forum today in Madison without Dr.
Yeah,
Underly.
it's the only time that the two candidates took part together in an event. Go ahead.
And I made that decision. So I actually had 2 events last night because that was the day that they offered, and I canceled one of the events. And then I actually was in a Zoom at a location, not my own location, because I thought it was really important that the public see us together, even if it was on Zoom, because I think that is really important. And so I changed, my plans to do that. And I also know that there were her supporters, that were hosting it. But I really believe that it was important that you all got to see me.
It was, by the way, a pretty good session, pretty level-headed session on both sides. I wish there were a lot more of them. So what would you do? But state superintendent is a peculiar job. There's fairly limited powers that you have. Mm-hmm. You can propose a budget, but you can't really make it happen.
I think I can.
Well, I'm not talking about, let's say you can't decree it. You can't say, here's my budget and give me the money. Because it goes to the governor, it goes to the legislature.
You have to work.
And the legislature, frankly, for the last 20 to 30 years has functioned as a state school board. Wisconsin, by the way, is the only state in the country. There are only a handful of states that don't have a state school board, something comparable to the Board of Regents for K-12 education. Wisconsin is the only state in the country that doesn't have a state school board, but does have an elected chief state school officer, namely the state superintendent of public instruction. But the powers are kind of limited. What would you do if you had this job?
So if I would talk about the budget before I get into my whole spiel, is that this is why it's so important to have strong relationships with the legislature. Like Dr. Underly has not met with Senator Lemieux or Robin Voss. And those are the 2 people who are leading the Republican Party. That's really important to have those conversations and have those meetings. If not, you're not going to be able to get things done. You have to have conversations, even if you're on different political sides. You have to have the conversations. And so I had those conversations. I have the relationships because when I was working here at City Forward Collective and we needed to get this bill passed, you have to talk with them. You have to meet with them about what's possible, and then along with the governor's office. So I know, when Dr. Underly lowered the standards, Governor Evers has come out and said she didn't tell us about it. She didn't tell me. She didn't communicate. And so I think my communication and relationships with the legislature and the governor will be helpful to all children in our state. So that I can go and advocate for our children. So,
what would be in your budget proposal as compared to what was in Dr. Underly's budget proposal, which called for a very substantial increase in state revenue for schools,
it was
over $4 billion.
Yeah, it was using the whole surplus. We're not going to, unfortunately, I would love for them to just spend the whole money on the whole surplus, but that's not going to happen. There's many other issues in our state that need to also be funded, and it's just not realistic. So you also have to be taken seriously. You should be having conversations before you release your budget so that you know that it is a possibility, not just a here it is and the wish list. And so I would like to, and I've promised, I've been in 40 different counties in this state, 12,000 miles in less than 100 days. I've been in this less than 100 days. I've promised everyone across the state that I will be a leader in modernizing our funding formula. It is very outdated. It's very complex. I would make sure I will, in my budget, I would also, she has something about special ed too, increase in special education. It is not keeping up with the expense. It's like 30% reimbursement. Like my first year when I opened up Rocket Ship Southside Community Prep, we had almost 20% of students were with special needs. We spent $1 million, but we didn't get reimbursed until the following year, and only at $300,000. So what do you have to obviously, give these services to our students with special needs. So you have to take that out of the general ed fund. And so I would look to not only increase the special ed spending. Do
you have a number in mind?
Well, I wouldn't, the governor has, I think, said 60%. But I think it also needs to be something different than a reimbursement. Other states around the country are not using a reimbursement. There's a different way to do it. So I would say it needs to be more, at least above 50% more than what we have now. I mean, not more than, at least 50% of what we're spending right now or getting reimbursed on.
What else would be in your budget proposal?
I definitely, for early literacy and tutoring, I don't have it completely all written out. I would have to see what was possible, but I have the reimbursement for special ed, travel reimbursement, busing needs to have a higher one in the rural areas. They're not getting enough either. And then ensuring that the literacy bill too, I would have money in there for that too.
Act 20, as we all know, 49 million out of the 50 million has been locked up because of partisan fighting over power in the Capitol.
Yeah.
Doesn't have much to do with children, has to do with power in the Capitol.
Yeah.
Could you get that money unlocked, do you think?
I would hope that that wouldn't have happened before. Like if you have someone who's talking to both sides and saying, this is why we need this money. We have schools who bought the curriculum after they were told that they'd get reimbursed. And they were acting in good faith of, this is what we should do. I would hope that if you're talking with both sides, telling them how important this is and like not being able, I think if you have the relationships, that matters. And I would hope that I could have helped that before it happened. I'm not saying I could. I would hope that that would help. And I have talked to others about this already, about what can we do? Because now that money just went back into the budget, into the surplus.
If it isn't changed by June 30th.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it's just, so I've already had some conversations around that.
There's been a surge statewide for the last several years of referendum votes for schools because districts need money. What does that say, and what could be done about that,
Again,
either by DPI or through the state budget?
Yeah, I think, again, that needs to, the funding formula needs to be modernized. Too many, taxpayers, across the state, everyone's saying this, the taxes are going up, and we need to have changes there, too. So I'm not an expert in the funding formula. Very few people are. And that's been the problem with it, is that it's so complex. But I will work with experts to help get that across the line. Everyone has talked about how it needs to be improved or modernized, and so I will help with that because it cannot be all on the taxpayers. We have to have a modernized funding formula, and I don't know exactly how that looks yet, but I will work with experts to do that.
We've got this, as we're sitting here, we're in the city of Milwaukee, which means we've got this school district called Milwaukee Public Schools. They've got problems. What role could you, as superintendent, play in dealing with those problems?
Yeah, so with the new superintendent, we all need her to be successful because her success is our children's success. So I want to be able to support, and as she said, hold her. I've heard her say that she wants to be held accountable to that too. So I want to have an office here in Milwaukee that is supporting the superintendent and the schools on best practices and making sure we are supporting, but also having transparency and accountability. Last year, when the whole financial fiasco was going on, and Superintendent Underly did not tell the public that MPS was having financial issues. That was one of the reasons why I jumped in. We need to make sure that we're being transparent, allow our voters to know what's happening before they vote on a referendum. So when I was getting signatures at Christmas time around the holidays, so people, I didn't know this, but you can go pay your property tax at City Hall. I knew that, but I didn't know that you could go and get signatures there because everyone's standing there. So if you ever run for office for spring, you can go in December and meet a lot of people from Milwaukee as they're standing and waiting, and they're willing to talk to you because they're just standing there. And so I talked to over 500 people, and over 3 or 4 days, people were in tears because their taxes have gone up so much, and they were retired, or they're business owners and they had a bad year and now they're spending another $1,000. And they brought up the fact that, I voted for the referendum not knowing that we didn't know the finances. So people started confiding in me. And that can't happen. We need to make sure that we're being transparent, giving the information to the public. And so I promise to be as honest and transparent if I get through.
Are there structural changes or broad-scale policy changes that could help MPS, that could come from Madison?
Yes.
Such as?
So I think that, there's some people in here from City Forward Collective. They've done a good job of outlining some of those things that can happen, especially like at the governing level. The school board needs to be supportive of the new superintendent. She needs to be able to have space to do the work and not constant pushing back. But the board also needs to have the information. She also needs to be able to be transparent with them and for them to hold her accountable, but also give her space to be able to do the work.
In the partisan atmosphere around this race, and in the partisan, hyper-partisan atmosphere around the nation, including, I believe, they're expecting that today President Trump is going to sign additional orders kiboshing the federal education department. What's your perspective on that and on the federal money coming here? Whether in Title I, in special ed. And I'm also interested, if you want to go back to the NAEP level standards at the time that they're virtually bringing the NAEP program to a halt.
I hope not.
Anyway, what's your perspective on the federal action?
So I've said this, that we must get the money from the federal government, the special ed, the title money, the money that comes to our state. We must have that money, full stop. And I'll advocate for that strongly, and I am. And so they have to keep their promise. So if they disband it, we need to make sure we get that money. They've promised that we will, we must. Our schools are relying on that. This is money that helps our special ed students, making sure that we're teaching reading, writing, and math in our schools. And it would be, I said this yesterday on the Zoom too, that it would be really wonderful if we had a plan so we know what this means, because it's causing, obviously, people to be very anxious about what's next. And so I think it's really important that we do have someone at DPI, though, that can have conversations across the aisle. Who is talking to Linda McMahon? Who from Wisconsin is advocating for us and our students? And so I'd be willing to have those conversations, right? We have to, she has been to states like New York. She has been traveling. We have to have those conversations with her so she understands what's at stake here, too, in Wisconsin. So making sure we get the funding, making sure that we can work with the Secretary of Education to ensure that we're getting what we need here in Wisconsin for our students. And then if we do have the money coming to us, hopefully there's more money, because there'd be less, if there's less money going into the department, that there's more money coming to our state. But then we also need to have a leader who's strong and making sure that they can work with all different stakeholders.
And NAEP, you have taken a strong stand for returning Wisconsin to NAEP level standards.
Yes.
How does that work if there's no NAEP?
I think that is a misguided decision if they take away NAEP. And so the nation's report card, I say whenever I say NAEP, people are like, what are we talking about?
The National Assessment of Educational Progress is what it stands for. But
and it's the nation's report card. And so I think that is misguided, and I hope that they have made some changes when they've taken other things away in other departments. I will advocate for that too.
Schools nationwide, certainly including Wisconsin, and every part of Wisconsin, are still really in recovery from COVID. Student mental health, attendance, just engagement. What are strategies you would advocate for dealing with that still continuing recovery?
Yeah. So the attendance part, students have to be in school to be able to learn, to learn how to read. And so there are schools across the country and districts that their attendance has improved. They're using plans such as making sure you're calling families if their child isn't there every day. There's incentives in school. Home visits for children who haven't been at school. They do, they have more intense support as it goes. But we have to have a clear plan and best practices on how ensuring getting our students to school. And so there needs to be a focus on that also. If you're not at school, you can't learn. And so I would have best practices on that too. There are schools that are doing it. So we need to make sure that we're all implementing those strategies and getting back to where we used to be, where we made sure students were at school.
Mental health. There has been some bipartisan action, even in Wisconsin, to increase counselors and support for students who have mental health challenges. Where would you see going with that in the next several years?
Yeah, and I've been asked by a lot of schools and school districts and superintendents, sometimes we put so much on the teacher to do all of it. Like, you need to teach, but you also need to be the counselor and the nurse and the everything. That is too much, right? As we see teachers leave, that's too much. And on the schools. So we need to be able to partner with organizations. So when I was working at a public charter school, because we did have such low reimbursement in special ed and K-4 funding where we had to make up that difference, I worked with different organizations that would come into the school. You had to give them a room, private space to work with students, but then they worked with the family's health insurance, or whether it was Badger Care, to be able to work with the families and the students. And then the school is not having to be the mental health expert, because you're not, as a principal, I wasn't taught how to be a mental health expert. So I think it's really important that we are partnering with agencies and organizations that are experts in mental health, so it's not all on the schools. And so that's my take on that.
That sort of leads into my next question, which is teacher pipeline, which is a classic function of DPI. But it's a huge issue these days. How do we get more and better teachers and keep them in the field?
Yeah, so we have to make sure that we are decreasing the barriers that we have for even great teachers from outstate to come in and be teachers here in Wisconsin. I also experienced this. I taught in Illinois with a license. I had my license from New York and Illinois to be a principal, and to come here it was very difficult to have your license to be transferred to Wisconsin. So we want to make sure that we take away those barriers. We want the best teachers coming here and staying. We also know that there's other programs across the country that are working for other states where they have apprenticeships. They have programs where they pay the teacher in training for 2 years. People who've been outside of teaching, but they're in a different profession, like if you wanted to be a teacher, journalism, your face. Making it possible for people to come in. There's alternative pathways. So we have to be innovative and allow for those kind of ways for teachers to be entering our schools. Also, other opportunities, such as when I went to school to be a special ed teacher, the state provided tuition grants. So as long as I taught for 2 years after I graduated with my special ed degree, they paid for my tuition. So then they gave me that grant. I didn't have to pay it back. So we have to think of things like that. But we also have to allow school districts who have people in the community who want to come and teach, giving them opportunities to create alternative pathways. And of course, we want to make sure it's quality at all times, but we want to look at how are the students doing in the schools as they have these alternative programs.
Let me hit on one more subject, and then we will take questions from the group here, but it's not a small subject, and that is going back to school choice. Dr. Underly is emphatic that she is an advocate for public money going only to classic public schools. You are in favor of school choice, at least in broad terms. Wisconsin is one of the capitals of school choice in the nation. Is it working?
So yes, I am a supporter of school choice. With most families, 83% of students are in our traditional public schools. Then open enrollment is the second largest school choice program that we have.
That is a fact. Right?
And so both my opponents, one is using open enrollment for his children, and then Jill Underly used private schools to send her children until she moved to a different district where she used the public schools. So we also have the private schools that we use scholarship or we call voucher, charter schools, homeschooling, virtual schooling. There's lots of different options. And I said last night too that there are schools in each sector that are doing really well, and then there's schools that are struggling in all of the sectors. But I do want to say that in Milwaukee we have about 100,000 students, and almost half of the families are using school choice. And then the conversation about taking away the voucher program, and we've had this for almost 30 years, and we have about 40,000, someone in here who hasn't the numbers is in here could correct me, but around 40,000 students who are using the program, who are living below a certain income. And when I feel like people have the audacity to say, we're going to take this program away from all of you, but they haven't talked to the 40,000 families, the Black and brown families who are living, a lot of them in poverty. And we're saying, we're going to take your school away because we don't think it's right. But how often have those people who said that they don't believe in the voucher program actually gone into the communities that this would be affecting them? Ask them, ask the parents. I did this a couple of years ago. I asked families, why do you choose the school you're choosing? And many families don't realize that other parts of the country don't have this program. A lot of families will send their one child to a private school, another child to a charter school, another child to the traditional public schools, because that's what's best for their child. And so I think we talk about a voucher as it's an object. A voucher is a scholarship that families use for their child. And we have to start talking about the children and families. Because then we go into the communities where families, these 40,000 families, you go into those communities and then ask them to vote for you after you just told everyone that you want to take their school away without other options. Right now, if we took all those schools away tomorrow, where would all the children go? So I want to make sure that we're talking about the kids and families that this is affecting and having the actual conversations with the communities this is going to affect.
Specifically in the city of Milwaukee, the voucher and charter schools, you could argue, in fact, people do argue, whether they're doing better than MPS. Mm-hmm. But in the broader picture, they're not doing much different. Kids in general have levels of success in education in the city of Milwaukee that are not good for the future of the city. Mm-hmm. Why is it so hard to succeed in Milwaukee? And are there key hurdles that could be jumped that would change that? So many things have been tried and they haven't succeeded.
Yeah, and I do believe all children should be equally funded, no matter what school they go to, right? They're a child, they should be equally funded. And I think that, my whole focus is on the science of reading and making sure we're teaching our children how to read. 30 years ago, we went to balanced literacy. That is not how you don't learn reading by, well, we know, by you just looking at the word in the picture and trying to figure it out. And so we need to make sure that we're training our teachers on how to teach phonics. We're focused on teaching phonics to our children. We know it works. We know that works. We just have to be consistent and making sure that our children are getting that instruction and our teachers are getting what they need to. Because our children come with all the potential, but we have to make sure that as adults, we are giving them the education they deserve.
Questions from anybody among us? Mr.
We have 10 minutes.
Ralph Weber.
Yes. Thanks.
1 minute.
Hi, Ralph.
Yes, Hillary's going around with a microphone here.
Great, thank you.
Hi.
You talked about how the superintendent changed the standards for proficiency. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about why proficiency in third grade reading is so important, mm-hmm. and how data plays into trying to get kids to that level?
So we know that if a child cannot read proficiently after third grade, it is very likely that they're not going to graduate, or maybe they will graduate, but they will not be able to get a job. You can't apply to go into the military. The military is talking about this, that they don't have enough applicants or people that qualify because kids aren't learning, they're not reading well enough. You can't go into a trade. We also know that children who can't read, there's also a pipeline into prison. Like it is really, really horrific if you can't learn if you don't know how to read after 3rd grade. It is a crisis. We need to start, all of us need to realize that and all act in the way of like, let's help our children. And the data can help us. So with Act 20, all the schools now are doing an assessment called Ames Web. You can see whether a child is learning how to read as early as kindergarten. You can start doing interventions. So the research shows 30% of us don't need phonics to learn how to read, but the rest of us do. And then some of us need intervention. Some of us need small group help. And then some of us need one-on-one help. And then there's 5% of students who aren't going to be able to read. And so the data shows us how the children are doing. So do we need to do an intervention? What kind of intervention? What kind of things do we need to do in the classroom? But we have to be really diligent. There is a science to this. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Well, hi.
Hi.
I am really, can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good.
I'm very happy I came because I came with one idea and I'm, okay. You're very good to listen to. You're a good marketer. You know, I think you'd sell. I like your transparency. I like the way you talk to everybody. 80 years ago, I learned by phonics. Yeah, you know, and
80 years ago?
you know, I've seen it. I've taught for many years, over 30 years in Milwaukee Public Schools.
Okay, thank
Okay?
you. Thank
I've
you for your
seen
service.
This come up, this go down. You know,
Yeah.
in education, they keep changing and changing. You know, they change, you know. When I was a freshman in high school, they changed algebra, found out it didn't work. Okay, now we try something different.
Question.
Okay, question. Okay.
We have 5 more minutes.
I had so many things that I wanted to say. Okay, thank you for all that. And the other thing is voucher schools. Okay, teaching the Milwaukee Public Schools, and he's right. There isn't much difference in through the city of Milwaukee voucher or public schools when it comes to you know, who's better, who's worse. But the 3rd Friday of every September, we get the voucher school students they kick out, the ones they don't want. You know, we always, the public schools get everybody. The private schools do not. And voucher schools are private schools. You know, and that's just something, I'm just telling you this, you know. And that's a real problem. Okay.
A question.
Okay, so what would you do about that?
What would I do about?
I mean, the fact that, I don't know. What, would the voucher schools have to keep everybody?
So as superintendent, I can't make the laws. So I'm not the legislature or the governor. So the legislators like to remind me. They're like, "You're not making the laws, Brittany." but something that came up was that one of my good friends is a principal in West House, one of the public schools, and she mentioned that she got a student after the count day in January, and she said, you know, we're not going to get any money. But then so I'm the type of person, when I find out there's a problem, I'm like, let me go figure out what's going on here. So I went and found out that the school, the private school also doesn't get all that money for that child. So where is that money going? That's the good question. Where does it go? So this private school's not getting the money. They get it I think it's there's people who work in private schools that receive vouchers here, but they don't get that money. So they may get part of it, but they don't get all of it. And they also get only $8,000 if it's an elementary school child, about $8,000 per child, not the $17,000. And my numbers are a little bit off, but that MPS gets. So there is a huge difference in funding. So they're not getting that money, and the public school is not going to get the money. So where is that money going? And that's something I'd like to figure out, and that's like for the modernizing the funding formula. Okay. But again, I can't modernize it, but I can advocate for it.
Putting on my education reporter's hat, I've focused on this question for like 25 years, and the actual facts are few and far between. It's largely, dare I say, an urban myth that the voucher schools kick the kids out, and people at MPS admit that and say they really have very few. That said, churn, switching schools for kids, is a huge problem in Milwaukee. Most of the churn is within MPS. And so anecdotally, you can come up with a lot of things, but as far as big figures, it actually doesn't happen very much.
And
But
I also,
that's just a factual
Yeah.
statement. Okay, yes, yes, sir.
I mean, also the school isn't getting all that money either. That's what I just
Well,
wanted to make
yeah,
sure.
and this notion that they keep, it's also more complicated than it looks on the surface. Yes, sir.
What do you think the position going forward is, or your position on trade schools?
Oh, trade schools are very important. As I have in part of my platform, I said, I want to restore high standards, make sure we're focusing on teaching reading, writing, and math so kids can have a meaningful job, go to college, or master a trade. We need to be, so I've traveled throughout the state, and I've been going to different businesses and manufacturing plants, which has been really fascinating. But they were saying that they need more kids who've had some training in high schools. So we need to have more programs. I know there's been some, but there needs to be more programs for our children who want to go into the trades. As you all know, I mean, I tried to get a plumber a couple of years ago, and it was so expensive, and I couldn't find one. And you can make a great living. It was like $500 an hour. So so yes, we have to have more programs for the trades. And I've seen it start happening in some of the schools I've been visiting, but we need to have more. Yeah, people can live a great life with going to the trades if that's what you want.
Yeah, so this might be a little bit too much of a multi-pronged question, but I do think that it becomes related, and maybe because we're talking about data and more statistics needing to be available. In Milwaukee, I'm a graduate of Milwaukee Public Schools. Children learn to read up until 3rd grade, and then they use that learning, the ability to read, to learn from that point on. In addition, the lead pipe poisoning data that is becoming available and the impact on a developing child's mind, the lack of nutrition, and the food deserts. These are all real things that I see as a banker.
Oh, you're a banker.
Yes. So when you brought up Chase earlier, I'm like, oh yes, I could share that story. Okay. So I don't know that I have so much a question as more just an observation that data is going to be important. So I guess.
Yeah, I don't think I said this here, but I want to create a website for DPI. I've been already doing my research on different states. Like Louisiana is they're outperforming us. Mississippi, the southern states are outperforming us on our nation's report card. But I started looking at their dashboards. I looked at Indiana's because they have a new website that's really, really great. We can make it better. But we need to make sure that information is easy to find, easy to read, easy to understand, so that everyone can use that information to make decisions on what's best for their
You're
schools.
suggesting it's not now with the DPI?
Yes, I'm suggesting
Oh,
that.
okay.
So
We have time for one last question.
We're going to
My
take one
last
more
question.
question.
I'm sorry, I have to go to Madison after this for another forum.
So there are some
Hi.
concerns that if we expand the voucher program, expand the role of charter schools, that they'll suck up all the resources, not just funding, but the best teachers, the most engaged parents, the most scholarly students. How do you ensure that if the charter schools do expand, they don't take up all the most essential resources that public schools need to thrive?
So how would I do that? So first, just again, like in Milwaukee, private schools that have vouchers and charter schools get a lot less per kid, about $5,000 to $7,000 less. Okay, so the schools have to fundraise to make up that difference. You still have to pay teachers. I just want to make sure that we're very clear on the resources that are not going to those schools. They're not funded equally. And so what I say to that is, when I was a charter leader, if a family left, I had to ask them, why are you leaving? Because when you leave, you don't get the funding for that child, right? Then it's less money. So I had to ask, why are you leaving? What could we have done better? And I think that has to be the conversation. If families are leaving the traditional public schools, why are you leaving? What can we do better? That has to be the conversation, not more of like, they're bad for leaving. No. We need to ask families, right? We have to ask them, why are you leaving? What does your child need? And I think those are the conversations that we have to start having. That's what I was talking about when we're going to people say they want to get rid of all the voucher schools. Those are families. Those are 40,000 families here in Milwaukee. We need to have those conversations. So my response is that if schools are losing, school districts are losing the number of families because they're choosing to go to a charter school or a private school. The district needs to start having conversations with the community about what do we need to do better to serve our community. I think that's really important. And that's what innovators do too. What do we need to do better? And there are always things we can all do better, right? And so that's what I would hope would happen.
We're going to stop there. As I said at the start, the label on this program is a get to know, and I hope people feel like they got to know Brittany Kinser better in this hour. And we, the Marquette Law School, for sure, are not making any endorsements here, but we do strongly support having knowledgeable voters and increasing public knowledge, and I hope we've served that purpose here. The election is April 1st, and many people vote early. There's always been a large amount of early voting. In our poll, the Marquette Law School poll a couple weeks ago, the percentage of people who were familiar with the candidates was really pretty low. I hope by doing these things, and by you, who I praise all of you for being here, doing this, we are moving the needle towards more knowledge and more knowledgeable voting and more knowledgeable citizenship. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Brittany for joining us. And stay tuned for more programming.
Thank you.